The storm had quieted just enough for the knocking to be heard. Heavy, desperate fists pounded against the cabin door, each strike laced with fear. Jonas Hale, the mountain man who had carved out a life in the wilderness, froze mid-step, his axe still in hand from the woodpile he had brought inside. His eyes narrowed, suspicion etched deep in the furrows of his face. No one climbed this high into the mountains unless they were running from something, or toward it. He dropped the axe to the floor and unlatched the door. The wind shoved it open, and there she stood, a widow, her dark hair soaked and clinging to her cheeks, her dress torn from the bramble trail. 2 children clung to her sides, a boy of about 8 and a girl hardly 6. Their lips were pale, their eyes hollow, and yet the fear burning in them was sharper than the cold itself. "Please," the woman gasped, her voice breaking, "will you protect us?" The question hit him harder than the icy wind. She didn't ask for food nor for a bed. She asked for protection, meaning there was danger already at her back. His hand tightened on the doorframe, but before he could answer, she added words that made his chest tighten further. "They'll find us by nightfall. We've nowhere else to run." Jonas's gaze flicked past her into the tree line. No figures yet, but the mountains carried sound, and he could swear he heard the faint echo of horses in the valley below. His life had been one of solitude, his rules simple. Let no one in, trust no one, survive alone. Yet here was a woman with children, shaking on his doorstep, asking him to choose. "Only if you're my wife," he said at last, his voice low, the words cutting through the storm. The widow blinked, stunned. The boy's hand clutched her skirt tighter, the little girl's head pressed into her hip. Her lips parted, but she couldn't find the breath to answer. She had expected shelter, maybe even rejection, but not this. Jonas's face didn't waver. To him it was not cruelty but survival. If he bound them to him, they were his to protect, no matter what came. She nodded once, tears streaking her dirt-stained cheeks. "Then I'll be your wife." Jonas pulled them inside just as a crack echoed from the ridge. A rifle shot. The boy flinched, the girl whimpered, and Jonas slammed the door shut, bolting it. His cabin had stood strong against storms, but bullets and men were another matter. He shoved them toward the fire, the children stumbling on weak legs. He snatched the rifle from the wall, every muscle in his body tightening as the sound of horses grew clearer. Whoever hunted them was near, too near. "Names?" Jonas demanded, his eyes never leaving the door. "Rachel," she whispered, pressing her children close. "My son is Thomas, my daughter is Anna." He nodded once, as if branding the names into his mind. He had lived too long with silence. Now these names would not leave him. The children stared at him wide-eyed, their bodies trembling not just from cold but from the terror of being chased. Another shot cracked, this one closer. Jonas knew they hadn't fired blind. They were warning him. His cabin, his rules, his solitude, they were no longer his alone. He looked at Rachel, saw the raw desperation in her eyes, and something inside him hardened. He had given his word. She was his wife now, even if neither of them understood what that meant yet. "Stay low," he ordered, his voice steady, "and don't move until I say so." The pounding of hooves thundered just beyond the ridge, then slowed. Men were out there, armed, hunting, circling like wolves. Jonas raised his rifle, his jaw set. He had been ready all his life to fight off the wilderness, but this was different. He wasn't only fighting for himself anymore. The little girl's voice broke the silence. "Mama, will they hurt us?" Rachel's arms tightened around her children, her face pale. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Jonas glanced at her once, then back to the window, his finger resting on the trigger. "No," he said, his voice like steel, "not while I'm here." The shadows of riders moved through the trees, their silhouettes cutting through the snow. Jonas steadied his rifle. If they wanted her, if they wanted the children, they would have to ride through him first, and he had no intention of letting them pass. The storm outside rose again, swallowing the mountain in a howl of wind. Inside, the fire crackled, the children clung to their mother, and Jonas stood between them and the door like a wall carved from the mountain itself. But in his gut, he knew this night was only the beginning. Because men who hunted women and children did not stop at the first door. They burned their way through until nothing was left. And Jonah's hail, whether by oath or by love, had just placed himself in their path. The first voice came then, low and taunting, drifting through the cracks in the cabin walls. "We know she's in there. Hand her over, mountain man. You don't want her trouble." Rachel buried her face in Anna's hair, trembling. Thomas's small jaw clenched as if he wanted to be brave but had no weapon to hold. Jonas kept his rifle aimed at the window, his voice cold. "She's my wife now," he growled back. "You'll get her over my dead body." Silence followed, then the laughter of men who weren't used to being defied. And then came the sound of boots hitting snow. The sound of boots crunching in the snow outside the cabin was enough to make Rachel's grip tighten around her children until her knuckles whitened. Jonas didn't move. He stood by the window with his rifle at the ready, the fire behind him casting long shadows up the walls, his silhouette looming like a sentinel who had sworn his life to this moment. His heartbeat slowed, controlled, steady as the storm outside. He had faced wolves, storms, hunger, and solitude, but never had he faced men while children trembled behind him. This was no longer just his fight for survival, it was theirs too. "Jonas," Rachel whispered his name for the first time, almost a prayer. Her eyes searched his face, desperate to understand the man who had tied their fate to his with a single sentence, "Only if you're my wife." "Quiet," Jonas said, not cruelly, but with the finality of a man who could hear things others couldn't. Outside, the voices rose again, circling the cabin like vultures around a carcass. "You think marrying her makes her yours?" one of them sneered. His voice carried arrogance, the kind that came from men who had taken whatever they wanted and never paid a price. "That widow's been promised to men stronger than you. You got no claim." Jonas didn't blink. "Then you don't know me." Rachel pressed her children closer to the fire, pulling a blanket around them. Her body trembled, but her eyes never left Jonas. The man who had given her shelter did not bend, and in that unflinching stance she found a sliver of hope, but it was tangled with dread. A sharp rap echoed against the cabin door, firm, deliberate. Not the desperate pounding of someone seeking shelter, but the warning knock of men who believed they already owned what was inside. Jonas raised his rifle toward the door, his eyes narrowing. "Mountain man," another voice called, rough and commanding. "You've got one chance. Hand over the widow and her brats and we'll leave you be. You're outnumbered, don't be a fool." Jonas's lips pressed into a thin line. He knew well enough what kind of men these were. The moment he handed them over, Rachel would be broken, the children discarded, and he himself left to die, or worse, left to watch. Men who hunted widows and children carried no mercy. "Best you turn back," Jonas called out, his voice low and calm but carrying through the storm. "She's mine now, and what's mine I keep." The silence that followed was heavier than the storm's howl. Rachel's breath caught. The children clung tighter. Then laughter, cruel, mocking, echoing around the cabin like the laughter of hyenas scenting blood. "Then you die with her," the voice spat. Jonas moved fast. He shoved a heavy table against the door and nodded toward Rachel. "Keep the children on the ground, away from the windows. Don't let them move." Rachel obeyed, pulling Thomas and Anna down behind the bed. Their little bodies shook as they clung to her. She whispered to them, soft words he couldn't hear, her lips brushing their hair, her own eyes locked on Jonas as though he were the only wall between life and death. Jonas crouched low, rifle ready, watching through a crack in the window. Shadows flickered against the snow, men moving cautiously, spreading out. He counted 3, then 4, maybe more beyond the tree line. His gut twisted. Alone, he could have vanished into the woods, outlasted them. But with children who couldn't run fast or far, this fight was already at his doorstep. The first shot slammed into the cabin wall, splintering wood near the window. Rachel gasped, shielding the children, their screams muffled against her chest. Jonas fired back, his rifle cracking through the night. One of the shadows fell, his body hitting the snow with a dull thud. The laughter stopped. Silence reigned. Then chaos. Gunfire erupted, bullets tearing into the cabin walls. Wood splintered, glass shattered, the fire hissed as sparks scattered. Rachel screamed for her children to keep down, covering their heads. Jonas ducked, reloading with practiced hands, his jaw clenched as he returned fire. The cabin shook with each strike, but Jonas's resolve didn't. He had sworn to protect them, and with every bullet that left his rifle, that oath carved itself deeper into his soul. When the firing paused, voices rose again. "You can't hold out forever. We'll burn you out, mountain man. You and your pretty new wife." Jonas's eyes flicked to the fire. His cabin was wood, dry in places despite the storm. If they set it alight, Rachel and the children wouldn't last minutes. He moved fast, grabbing a bucket and shoving it into Rachel's hands. "Snow, pack it against the door. Now." She hesitated only a second before scrambling to obey, pulling the children with her, their small hands helping scoop snow through the broken window, pressing it against the doorframe. Jonas covered them, firing at shadows that tried to press closer. Another man fell, his scream echoing through the night before it was cut short. But there were still more, too many. Jonas could feel it in his bones. The fight wouldn't end tonight. These men weren't the type to flee when blood spilled. They would regroup, wait for weakness, and strike again. And Rachel knew it too. Her eyes locked on his as she shoved snow against the walls, her breath ragged. "They won't stop," she whispered. Jonas didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was enough. The night stretched long, the storm raging outside, the cabin battered by bullets, fists, and threats. Yet Jonas held the line. Rachel kept the children low, her body their shield. Hours crawled by, the fire burning low, the air thick with smoke and fear. At last the shooting ceased. The voices retreated into the trees. For a moment, silence. Only the storm howled. Rachel's breath hitched, hope flickering in her eyes, but Jonas didn't lower his rifle. He knew silence was often more dangerous than noise. Then came the words, carried on the wind like a curse. "We'll be back at dawn, and when we come, nothing will save you." The hoofbeats faded, swallowed by the storm. Rachel collapsed against the floor, her children in her arms, tears streaming down her face. The fight was over for now, but the terror hadn't left her eyes. Jonas lowered his rifle at last, his body weary but unbroken. He looked at her, at the children, at the fragile family that had crashed into his solitude. "You're safe for tonight," he said, his voice rough. Rachel looked up at him, her lips trembling. "And tomorrow?" Jonas didn't answer. His silence told her everything. Tomorrow would be worse. He stoked the dying fire, every motion heavy with thought. He had taken them in. He had called her his wife. And by that word alone, he had bound himself to them. Tomorrow, men would ride again, and the mountain would echo with blood and fire. For the first time in years, Jonas Hale realized solitude had been easier. But he also realized something else. Solitude had been emptier. Now, as the children clung to their mother and she clung to the hope he alone provided, he knew the fight ahead wasn't just about survival. It was about something larger, something worth dying for. He set his rifle beside him, his eyes still on the door. The storm howled louder, carrying with it the promise of dawn, and with dawn, reckoning. The fire had burned down to embers, but Jonas didn't dare let it go out. He fed the flames with measured hands, careful not to draw too much smoke, careful not to waste the fuel he had stacked for winter. His eyes never strayed far from the windows, the door, the cracks where moonlight and stormlight bled into the cabin. Rachel sat huddled with Thomas and Anna on the bed, her arms a cage around them, her hair falling in damp strands across her cheeks. She had cried herself silent, not because the fear had passed, but because she could no longer let her children see the panic in her eyes. They had to believe she was steady, even when her whole body trembled. Jonas leaned against the wall, rifle across his knees. his head tilted slightly, listening not just to the storm outside but to the silence between gusts. That silence was never empty. It carried secrets, movements, intent. Somewhere below in the valley, those men were waiting. He knew their kind. They wouldn't sleep, wouldn't give up. They had made it clear. They wanted Rachel and the children, and men who rode that far into the wilderness for prey didn't leave empty-handed. Rachel's whisper broke through the crackle of the fire. "You don't even know us. Why would you risk everything for me, for them?" Jonas didn't answer right away. He stared at the fire, the shadows dancing across his scarred hands. Finally, his voice came, low and steady. "Because I gave my word." Her lips parted, a soundless reply caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say. No man she had ever met had treated his word as a bond stronger than iron. Yet Jonas had tied his life to hers with nothing more than a sentence, a claim spoken in the storm. Thomas stirred then, his voice small but sharp in the stillness. "Are you really our papa now?" Rachel's breath caught, but Jonas didn't flinch. He turned his gaze on the boy, steady as a stone. "I'm the one keeping you safe. That's what a father does." The boy blinked at him, and in that moment, something in his eyes softened, just for a heartbeat, before fear pulled him back into his mother's embrace. Anna whimpered softly, too young to understand, but not too young to feel the weight of terror pressing into her bones. Rachel pulled them close again, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She wanted to protest, to tell Jonas that this arrangement was only words, a desperate trade for survival. But deep inside she felt the truth of it. A wall had risen between her children and death, and that wall had a name, Jonas Hale. Hours stretched long. Rachel dozed lightly against the bed frame, but Jonas never slept. He sat with his rifle, eyes open, ears attuned. Each creak of the cabin, each shift of the storm, each distant snap of a branch outside, he tracked them all. And when at last the storm began to fade, when the sky beyond the cracks began to pale with the gray of morning, Jonas's body tensed like a bowstring. Dawn had come, and with it death. He moved to the door, unlatching the top bolt but leaving the bottom locked. He pressed an eye to a crack in the wall. The storm had blanketed the world in white. Trees stood heavy with snow, the ground a field of untouched silence, untouched except for the trail. The hoofprints of men circled the cabin, deep and fresh, proof that they had stayed close all night, watching, waiting. Jonas's gut hardened. Rachel stirred behind him, her voice raw. "Are they out there?" "Yes," he didn't lie. "They'll come soon." Thomas whimpered, burying his face in his mother's dress. Anna clung tighter. Rachel bit her lip until it bled, forcing her tears back. Jonas stepped away from the door, his rifle in hand. He grabbed the hatchet from the wall, setting it near the hearth, then pulled a second rifle from behind a trunk. He handed it to Rachel. Her eyes widened. "I don't know how." "Then learn," Jonas said firmly. "If I fall, it's you between them and your children." Her fingers shook as she wrapped them around the weapon, its weight unfamiliar, terrifying. But she nodded. She couldn't argue. The sound came then, hoofbeats, slow and deliberate, crunching through the snow. Jonas's jaw tightened. He stepped to the window again, lifting the rifle. Through the branches, dark figures emerged, 4 riders, cloaked in the gray dawn, their horses steaming in the cold. And behind them 3 more, 7 men, armed, hard-faced, circling like predators who had already tasted blood. Rachel gasped softly. Jonas shot her a sharp look, and she clamped a hand over her mouth. One of the riders dismounted, striding forward with the swagger of someone who believed himself untouchable. His voice carried through the crisp air. "Mountain man, I'll say it once more so there's no confusion. Hand over the woman and the brats. You can walk away alive." Jonas opened the door, just a crack enough for his voice to carry but not his body. His words rolled out like thunder. "She's my wife. They're my children. You'll take them only if you take me first." Laughter rang out from the men, echoing through the trees. "Then so be it," the leader sneered. He raised a hand and the riders spread wide, rifles lifting. Jonas slammed the door shut just as the first volley of shots exploded. Bullets ripped into the cabin walls, shattering glass, splintering wood. Rachel screamed, pulling the children to the floor, her body covering theirs. Jonas fired back, quick and precise, his bullets finding one rider, sending him crashing from his horse. The air filled with gunfire, smoke, the smell of powder. Jonas moved like a man possessed, reloading, firing, ducking, firing again. Each shot was a lifeline cast over Rachel and the children. Each bullet from outside was death reaching, clawing, trying to tear them away. Rachel clutched the rifle Jonas had given her, her hands trembling so badly she could barely keep it steady. But when one shadow moved close to the window, too close, she lifted the weapon with a cry and pulled the trigger. The blast rang out, the recoil slamming into her shoulder, but the man at the window dropped, his scream cut short. She stared at the smoking rifle in shock, her chest heaving, tears spilling down her cheeks. Jonas glanced at her once, his eyes fierce. "Good, again if you have to." The children sobbed into her arms, but she held them tighter, whispering through her tears, "I won't let them take you. I won't." Outside, the leader's voice roared again, "Burn it, burn them out." Jonas's heart sank. He had feared this. Already he could smell the acrid smoke of oil, see one of the men dragging a torch from his saddlebag. The cabin, his refuge, his life, it was about to become a coffin. He spun to Rachel, "Take the children, sell her now." She froze, "What about you?" "I'll hold them," he said, his tone like stone. "No," she cried, grabbing his arm, her eyes wild with desperation. "They'll kill you." Jonas's jaw clenched. "They'll kill us all if you stay." Rachel's tears streaked her face as she pulled Thomas and Anna toward the cellar door hidden beneath the bed. But the children clung to her, sobbing, their little voices breaking the air. "Mama, don't leave him." Jonas's gaze locked on the torch as it neared, the flame licking hungrily. He raised his rifle, fired, and the torchbearer fell, the flame snuffed into the snow. But more men pressed forward, anger burning hotter than fire. The siege had only just begun. And Jonas Hale knew this fight would not end without blood on the snow. The snow outside churned with chaos, hooves pounding, voices shouting, and bullets tearing through the cabin walls like angry bees. Jonas Hale stood in the dim light of dawn, his rifle steady though the storm of gunfire shook the world around him. Rachel was crouched by the bed, shoving Thomas and Anna into the trapdoor that led to the cellar. The children wailed, clinging to her skirts, refusing to leave their mother while the world outside screamed with violence. "Down," Jonas barked, his voice carrying like thunder. "Get them down, Rachel, now." Her arms shook as she pried Anna's small fingers from her dress, shoving her gently but firmly into the cellar's darkness. Thomas followed, his tears staining his dirt-streaked face. Rachel kissed their foreheads, whispering words only a mother can speak, then yanked the trapdoor shut. Her trembling hands pulled the rug across it to hide the seam, her eyes wild with terror and fury. Jonas turned just as another round of bullets splintered the window. Glass rained down across the floor, sparks leaping from the fireplace as smoke filled the air. He fired back without hesitation, his shot dropping another shadow in the snow. The man fell with a scream that echoed through the trees, silencing the laughter of his comrades for a fleeting moment. Rachel pressed herself against the wall, clutching the rifle Jonas had given her, her breath ragged. She wanted to believe his command to hide her children would save them, but she couldn't shake the image of fire being poured into the cabin, of smoke choking the little ones below. She looked at Jonas, his broad frame silhouetted against the flickering fire, and a realization sank into her heart like a stone. If he fell, they were all lost. The leader outside bellowed, his voice filled with venom. "You think you can keep them from us? You think a lonely mountain rat can stand against 7 armed men? Step aside, Hale, and we'll let you keep your skin." Jonas spat into the fire, his face unflinching. "If you want her, come take her, but you'll leave in the ground." A roar of fury erupted outside, and then the thud of bodies slamming against the cabin walls. The door rattled against its bolts, snow and smoke bursting through the cracks. Jonas fired through the window, reloading with movements as sharp and precise as a clock's ticking gears. But the pounding grew louder, heavier. He knew the truth. The cabin couldn't hold forever. Rachel pressed forward suddenly, fear and courage mixing in her tear-soaked face. "Jonas, you can't keep them out much longer. We have to run." His eyes snapped to hers, hard as granite. "Run where? Into the open. They'll pick you off before you reach the trees." "We'll die in here," she screamed, her voice cracking. Jonas's jaw clenched, but he didn't look away from her. Better fighting behind wood than falling on open ground. The truth of it hit Rachel like a slap. Her heart pounded, her chest heaving as the walls shook around them. Yet in Jonas's eyes there was no hesitation, no weakness. He was a man carved by storms and solitude, and though he stood alone for so many years, now he stood for them. For her. The cabin door shuddered again, cracking near the hinge. Jonas grabbed the hatchet, slammed it into the wood above the doorframe, and pulled down a heavy timber brace he'd hidden for years against the possibility of a bear breaking in. The timber thudded into place, locking the door tighter, buying them moments more. Outside, the men cursed, their voices rising with fury. Then came the unmistakable sound, oil sloshing against wood. Rachel gasped, her eyes wide. "They'll burn us alive." Jonas's teeth clenched as he spun back to the window. He aimed, fired. The torchbearer dropped again, his flame sputtering into the snow. But a second man stepped forward, flame already rising in the pale dawn. Jonas fired again, dropping him too, but now there was movement in every direction. They were testing him, probing his defenses, waiting for the moment his rifle clicked empty. The world outside was a trap closing tighter. Rachel clutched the rifle in her hands, her entire body trembling. She lifted it toward the shattered window, her breath ragged. She remembered the recoil from before, the sharp pain in her shoulder, the way the man's scream had haunted her. But then she thought of Anna's tiny arms around her neck, Thomas's voice asking if Jonas was their father now, and she pulled the trigger. The blast echoed through the cabin, her cry swallowed by it, and another shadow fell outside. Rachel stumbled back, shaking, her eyes wide with horror and relief all at once. Jonas shot her a quick glance, his voice rough but steady. "Good, keep steady hands. They fear the gun same as we do." Her lips trembled, but she nodded. Tears blurred her sight, but she forced herself to stand, forced herself to believe she could fight if it meant saving her children. The pounding on the door ceased, replaced by whispers outside, low and urgent. Jonas pressed his ear against the wall, straining. He caught fragments, circle back, set the roof, pick him when he shows. He pulled away, his expression dark. They weren't retreating, they were planning. "Rachel," he said suddenly, his voice lower, graver than before, "if I fall." "No," she cut him off, her voice breaking. "Don't you say it, don't you dare." "Listen," he snapped, his tone sharper, dragging her gaze to him. "If I fall, you don't hesitate. You take the rifle, you take those children, and you fight. Don't run, don't beg, you fight." Her tears spilled freely now, but she held his gaze, her lips trembling. She nodded once, though her heart screamed against it. Then it happened. The roof above them shook, a heavy thud dropping snow into the cabin. Jonas's head snapped up. A man had climbed onto the roof. Another shadow followed. They were going to breach from above. Jonas fired through the ceiling, wood splintering, the scream of a man tearing through the dawn. But another dropped through the rafters, landing hard on the floor. He lunged toward Rachel, knife gleaming. Rachel screamed, stumbling back. Jonas dropped his rifle, snatched the hatchet from the wall, and swung. The blade buried deep into the man's shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground with a howl. Jonas wrenched the hatchet free, his chest heaving, eyes blazing. Rachel clutched her rifle, her body shaking violently. There's more of them." The cabin's roof groaned again under weight. Boots shifted above, and the shadows grew darker. Jonas knew they were seconds from being overwhelmed. He grabbed Rachel's wrist, his grip iron. "Get the children. If the roof falls, we take the trees. Do you hear me?" She nodded, sobbing, her hands trembling as she scrambled toward the cellar trapdoor. She pulled it open, the children staring up at her with wide, terrified eyes. "Stay ready," she begged them. Above, Boots stomped, and then the cabin's rafters cracked. Snow and wood tumbled down as another intruder dropped through. Jonas roared, swinging the hatchet again. The cabin became a storm within a storm: fire, smoke, snow, screams, and blood. And outside, more voices rose. The men hadn't retreated. They were closing in. They wouldn't stop until Rachel and her children were dragged into the snow, or until Jonas Hale's body fell lifeless at their feet. Rachel pulled her children up from the cellar, refusing to leave them in the dark while the roof caved in. She clutched them tight, the rifle shaking in her hands, her sobs mingled with fury. Jonas fought like a beast in the firelight, his axe flashing, his rifle cracking, but the walls of the cabin seemed to close tighter with every passing second. The storm outside raged, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside. And as another shadow leapt from the roof, Jonas realized dawn had brought no salvation. It had only brought war. The cabin groaned under the weight of men and snow, every creak and splinter a warning that their sanctuary was moments from becoming a grave. Jonas Hale stood at the center, his chest heaving, his face cut with streaks of soot and sweat. His rifle smoked in his hands, the hatchet at his belt dripping with the blood of the last man who had dared to drop through the roof. Yet he knew with every tightening muscle in his body, that more were coming. Rachel clutched Thomas and Anna against her chest, their small faces pressed into her dress as though they could bury themselves away from the horror. Her trembling hands still gripped the rifle Jonas had thrust on her, the weapon heavy, alien, yet her only shield. She wanted to pray aloud, but she bit it back, afraid that even her voice might draw death closer. Then the roof cracked again. A long splinter tore down the beam as snow poured in, the storm outside forcing its way through the breach. Jonas's head snapped up, rifle raised, but before he could fire, a dark figure dropped from above. The man landed hard, knife already drawn. Jonas pivoted, his rifle too close for another shot, and slammed the butt into the man's jaw. The knife clattered to the floor. The stranger lunged again, fists flying. Jonas caught him with a forearm, the two grappling in the smoke-filled cabin. They slammed against the wall, rattling the wood, their grunts and snarls filling the room. The man was strong, younger perhaps, but Jonas's strength was born of years alone in the wilderness, chopping wood, hauling game, fighting off wolves. With a growl, he drove the man backward, slammed his head against the doorframe, and wrenched the knife from his grip. One sharp thrust, and the fight ended. The intruder slumped to the floor, lifeless. Rachel gasped, her children crying louder, their little hands gripping her arms with desperate strength. Jonas turned, blood on his hands, his face pale but his eyes burning with fire. "We can't hold the cabin," he said, his voice rough and urgent. Rachel's heart froze. "Then what do we do?" He grabbed a heavy blanket from the bed, throwing it over her shoulders and the children. "We move, through the back, while they're still pressing the front." Her eyes widened. "In the open, they'll shoot us down." Jonas's jaw tightened. "Not if I lead." She stared at him, tears streaking her cheeks. She wanted to protest, wanted to beg him not to risk himself, but there was no time. The pounding outside grew louder, boots circling, voices shouting. The men were closing in, and if they didn't leave now, they'd never leave at all. Jonas moved quickly, tearing up the rug in the back corner. Beneath it lay a hatch, smaller than the cellar, leading to a tunnel carved years ago when he first built the cabin. A way out, a hunter's path, meant for escape if a bear or raiders came too close. He threw it open, the cold air rushing in, the snow glimmering faintly in the dawn. Rachel's breath caught. She gathered Thomas and Anna, their tears freezing against their faces, and pushed them toward the tunnel. Jonas dropped to his knees, ushering them through. The boy scrambled forward, the girl clinging to her mother, sobbing softly. Rachel followed, her body twisting as she pulled the children through the narrow gap. Jonah's came last, pulling the hatch shut above them, leaving the fire, the warmth, the cabin, and the bodies of the dead behind. The tunnel spat them out at the base of a hill, snow up to their knees, the trees thick and dark. Jonas shoved them forward, his voice a growl. "Stay low, stay quiet." The world outside was colder, sharper. The storm had slowed, but the air still cut like knives. The snow muffled their movements, but it also slowed them, their breaths heaving clouds into the gray morning. Behind them, the cabin shook with pounding boots, voices shouting as the men realized their prey had vanished. "They're gone, find them." Jonas didn't waste time. He pulled Rachel by the arm, urging her through the trees. His rifle stayed tight against his chest, his eyes scanning every shadow. He knew the mountain better than any of them, but dragging a woman and 2 children through snow was no simple feat. The men would spread wide, circle, and hunt. It was only a matter of time before their trail was found. Rachel stumbled, her legs weak, her skirts heavy with snow. Jonas caught her before she fell, his grip steady, strong. "You keep moving," he hissed. "For them, for those children." Her eyes met his, and in that moment she saw more than just the mountain man who had taken her in. She saw the weight of his vow pressing down on him, the fire in his soul that refused to let go. She nodded, tears freezing on her lashes, and pressed forward, clutching Anna in her arms while Thomas trudged beside her. The shouts grew closer. Men's voices echoed through the trees, dogs barking faintly in the distance. Rachel's stomach knotted in terror. If they had dogs, the snow would hide nothing. Jonas heard it too, his jaw clenched. "We split," he said suddenly. Rachel froze. "No. You take the children, head east toward the ridge. There's a cave halfway up. You'll see it by the broken pine. Hide there." She shook her head violently, her arms tightening around Anna. "I won't leave you." Jonas leaned close, his eyes fierce. "If they follow me, you'll have a chance. I can draw them off. But if you stay at my side, they'll catch us all." Rachel's heart broke. She wanted to scream, to fight him, but the sound of men crashing through the snow grew louder, closer. She saw the truth in his eyes. The only way to save Thomas and Anna was to let Jonas risk himself. Her tears spilled freely as she nodded, her lips trembling. She bent low to Thomas, whispering urgently, "Listen to me, baby, follow me. Don't let go of my hand. We're going to hide and Jonas will find us." The boy's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded bravely, though his small jaw shook. Rachel turned back to Jonas, her voice breaking. "Promise me you'll come back." His hand brushed her cheek, rough, fleeting. "I gave my word. You're my wife now. I don't break my word." Then he turned, rifle in hand, and sprinted into the trees, his broad frame cutting through the snow like a shadow. Shouts rose instantly, men bellowing as they spotted him. Shots rang out, bullets slamming into the trees. Jonas didn't flinch. He ran, fast and deliberate, drawing the hunt toward him, away from the broken pine and the cave. Rachel bit back a sob, clutching her children. She turned east, dragging them through the snow, her legs burning, her chest heaving. Behind her, the sound of gunfire and men's voices echoed through the mountain, chasing Jonas into the storm. Anna whimpered softly, her small arms clutching her mother's neck. Thomas's face was pale, his eyes wide, but he kept moving, kept holding tight to Rachel's hand. She whispered to them through her tears, her words breaking, desperate. "We'll make it. He'll find us. Just hold on." At last, through the trees, she saw it, the broken pine, split down the middle by some long-ago storm. And there, behind it, the mouth of a cave, dark and deep. She stumbled forward, nearly falling as her knees gave out, but she forced herself on, shoving the children inside, pressing them back into the shadows. She collapsed against the wall of the cave, clutching them close, her sobs finally breaking free. The children cried into her arms, trembling, their little voices muffled. Rachel rocked them, whispering, praying, clinging to the hope that Jonas would come. But outside, the storm swallowed his footsteps, and the echoes of gunfire faded into the mountain. She couldn't see him, couldn't hear him. She had no way of knowing if Jonah's Hale was still alive. And in the silence of that cave, Rachel realized that dawn had brought her nothing but a new kind of waiting. The waiting to see if the man who had claimed her life as his own would survive long enough to keep his vow. The cave swallowed Rachel, Thomas, and Anna in its cold embrace, the walls dripping with frozen dew, the air sharp enough to bite their lungs. Rachel pressed her back against the stone, clutching Anna to her chest while Thomas huddled close at her side. The children were silent now, not from calm, but from exhaustion and terror. They had cried until their small bodies had nothing left, and now they leaned against their mother, trembling, eyes too wide for children so young. Rachel stroked their hair, whispering words more to keep herself sane than to soothe them. "He'll come back. Jonas will find us," he promised. She repeated it again and again, as though if she said it enough it would hold the weight of a prayer. Yet each time the words left her lips, doubt gnawed at her heart. Promises were fragile things, and men who walked into storms of bullets rarely returned. Outside, the mountain was restless. Snow cracked from branches, the storm winds died and rose again, and somewhere below the shouts of men echoed faintly. Gunfire had stilled, leaving only the ghost of its violence in Rachel's ears. Silence could mean many things. It could mean Jonas had shaken them, or it could mean he had fallen. The thought twisted her stomach until she nearly retched. Thomas suddenly lifted his head, his voice breaking the heavy silence. "Mama, what if they catch him?" Rachel's chest caved under the question. She wanted to tell him the truth, but the truth was a blade she couldn't press against her child's heart. She cupped his cheek with a trembling hand, forcing a smile through her tears. "Then he'll fight his way back to us. Jonas doesn't give up." Thomas nodded slowly, though his eyes betrayed his fear. Anna, too small to ask but not too small to feel, buried her face deeper into her mother's dress, her tiny fingers clutching tightly. Rachel lifted her head toward the cave's mouth, straining to hear, to catch any sound of Jonas's return. But all she heard was the howl of the mountain wind, sweeping through the pines like a chorus of ghosts. She bit her lip until it bled, tasting salt and iron. Time stretched cruelly. Each heartbeat felt like a year. She held her children until their trembling slowed, until at last their bodies slumped against her in sleep, exhaustion dragging them down even in the shadow of danger. Only then did Rachel allow herself to sob silently, her tears freezing against her skin, her body shaking with the weight of fear, grief, and hope tangled together. Jonah's Hale ran like a wolf through the trees, snow spraying at his boots, rifle in hand. The shouts of men trailed behind him, but fewer now. The rest must have fanned out, scouring the woods. He kept low, weaving through the pines, his breath fogging the air, his muscles burning with exertion. Each step was deliberate, leaving no pattern, no easy trail for hunters or hounds. Bullets had chased him, but the mountain was his ally. He darted across frozen streams, scaled jagged ridges, and doubled back in ways only a man born to solitude could manage. The hunters were bold, but they were outsiders here. Their arrogance would cost them time he desperately needed. Jonas ducked into a hollow beneath an overhanging rock, crouching low. His chest heaved, sweat freezing against his skin. He counted the sounds, 2 men close, 1 farther, maybe more behind. He raised his rifle, waiting. The first shadow appeared through the trees, his breath heavy, his rifle swinging. Jonas fired. The man dropped into the snow, his cry silenced by the mountain's echo. The second shouted, firing wildly, his shot splintering a tree near Jonas's shoulder. Jonas rolled out, steady, calm, his second shot ringing true. Silence returned, heavy, final. Jonas's jaw tightened. 2 more dead, but the leader still out there, and likely more riders circling the mountain's base. He couldn't take them all head-on, not while Rachel and the children waited for him. His oath bound him to them, and oaths weren't words to Jonas, they were marrow in his bones. He slipped deeper into the woods, circling toward the broken pine. If Rachel had done as he said, she would be in the cave, hidden. He prayed she had listened, prayed she hadn't risked herself trying to follow him. He couldn't shake the image of her face, the way her lips had trembled when she begged him to promise he'd return. That image pushed his legs faster than fear ever could. Rachel startled awake in the cave, her body stiff from the cold stone. Thomas stirred beside her, Anna still asleep in her arms. For a moment she didn't know if she had dreamed the footsteps or if they were real, but then she heard it again. Snow crunching, slow, deliberate, approaching. Her breath caught in her throat. She tightened her grip on the rifle, though her hands shook so violently she feared she would drop it. She pulled the children closer, her body curling around them like a shield. "Rachel," a voice hissed suddenly through the wind. Her heart stopped. It was Jonah's. She stumbled to her feet, nearly tripping as she rushed to the mouth of the cave. And there he was, his figure emerging from the trees, broad shoulders dusted with snow, his rifle slung across his back. His eyes found hers instantly, and the fire in them softened for the first time since she had met him. Rachel collapsed into him, her tears soaking his shirt, her hands clutching his arms as though to prove he was flesh and not some cruel illusion. "You came back," she sobbed, the words breaking from her chest. Jonas held her tight for a moment, his hand resting on her back. "I gave my word." Thomas rushed forward, throwing himself against Jonas's side, and even Anna stirred, reaching out with tiny fingers. Jonas knelt briefly, his rough hand brushing Thomas's hair, his other lifting Anna into his arms. For a moment, just a fleeting moment, they were not hunted, not broken, not trembling. They were a family bound not by blood but by a promise spoken in a storm. But Jonas's eyes hardened again as he set Anna back in Rachel's arms. "They're not gone, not all of them. The leader's still out there. He won't stop." Rachel's breath hitched. "Then what do we do?" Jonas glanced toward the mountain ridge, his mind already moving faster than his words. "We climb. Higher ground gives us a chance. If they want you, they'll bleed for every step they take." Rachel's legs nearly buckled at the thought of more climbing, more running, but she saw the resolve in Jonas's face and knew there was no other choice. She nodded, clutching Anna close, Thomas holding her free hand. Jonas led them from the cave, guiding them through the pines, always listening, always watching. Each step up the ridge was a battle, the snow deep, the air thinner. Rachel stumbled often, but Jonas's hand was always there to steady her. Thomas tried to be brave, biting his lip until it bled, refusing to complain though his little legs shook. Anna whimpered softly, but Rachel whispered prayers into her hair, keeping her moving. Hours passed, the mountain rising steeper, the trees thinning. At last they reached a ledge, a shelf of stone overlooking the valley. Jonas stopped, scanning the horizon. From here he could see smoke rising faintly in the distance, the remains of his cabin. His jaw tightened. He had built that cabin with his hands, every log a year of his life. Now it was ash, another piece of his solitude burned away. Rachel saw it too, her breath catching. "Jonas, I'm so sorry." He shook his head, his voice low. "It was only wood. You and the children, you're what matters now." Her lips parted, but no words came. The truth of his statement sank into her chest like a hot coal, warming her even as the cold wind cut through her. Then suddenly a sound froze them all, hoofbeats, distant but closing. Jonas grabbed Rachel's arm, pulling her against the stone. "Stay low, don't move." The riders emerged below, small figures against the snow but growing closer. The leader's voice rose above the wind, furious, mocking. "You can't hide forever, Hale. The woman is ours, the children too. You're just a man standing in the way." Jonas raised his rifle, his eyes narrowing. His voice carried down the ridge, sharp as a blade. "Then come take them." The riders halted, their horses stamping. The leader leaned forward, his face shadowed by his hat. For a long moment silence stretched, the mountain itself holding its breath. Then the leader lifted a hand, and the men began to climb. Rachel clutched Thomas and Anna close, her body trembling. Jonas crouched low, his rifle steady, his jaw clenched. This was no longer a siege. This was a reckoning, and the mountain would decide who walked away. The ledge was narrow, the rocks sharp underfoot, and the wind tore at them as if the mountain itself sought to push them into the abyss. Jonas Hale crouched low, rifle pressed tight to his shoulder, eyes locked on the riders below who were now dismounting to climb. Each man moved with purpose, spreading wide to flank, their voices rising in laughter that carried up the ridge like the baying of wolves. Her legs obeyed even as her heart screamed. She scrambled up the rocks, dragging Thomas, Anna clinging to her neck. The stone tore at her skirts, her knees, but she didn't care. Every step was a battle, but she climbed, Jonas covering them with fire. Bullets slammed into the stone around him, sparks flying, but Jonas didn't falter. He reloaded, fired, moved, his body shielding the small figures scrambling above. He climbed last, his boots slipping on the ice, his muscles straining, but at last he hauled himself up beside them. The shelf was narrow, the drop sheer on one side, the stone wall pressing against their backs. Rachel collapsed against it, clutching her children, coughing from the smoke that still rose below. Jonas crouched in front, rifle ready, eyes scanning. The men shouted below, their torches blazing now, smoke rising thicker. Jonas's mind raced. They were pinned. If the fire climbed higher, there would be nowhere to run. Rachel's voice cracked through the smoke. Jonas, what if they reach us? His eyes never left the ridge below. Then we fight. Her sobs broke, her forehead pressing against his shoulder, her tears soaking his coat. We can't win. Jonas finally turned, his hand gripping her chin, forcing her eyes to his. His gaze was fierce, unyielding. Rachel, look at me. We're not dying here. You hear me? You and those children are walking off this mountain, because I said you would. Her breath caught, her heart pounding against his words. She nodded, though fear still clawed at her. She clung tighter to Anna, kissed Thomas's hair, whispering a prayer even as her body shook. The first head appeared over the ridge, eyes wild, rifle raised. Jonas fired, the body tumbling back, blood marking the snow. Another followed. Jonas fired again. The echoes of gunfire shook the mountain, screams mingling with the storm. But still they climbed, still they came. And then Jonas's rifle clicked empty again. He dropped it, pulling the hatchet from his belt. His eyes blazed with fire as he rose to his full height, blocking the narrow path with his body. "Stay behind me," he growled. Rachel's heart stopped as she watched him stand against the tide, one man against many. The children whimpered, clinging to her, their small bodies trembling. Jonas raised the hatchet, his face set in stone. The leader's voice rose below, filled with triumph. Now he falls, take him. Boots pounded against the rocks, shadows climbing fast, rifles gleaming, knives flashing. The smoke burned Rachel's throat, the fire crackled below, and death climbed closer with every second. Jonas roared, his voice shaking the ridge, echoing through the mountain. "You'll never touch them, not while I draw breath." Rachel's sobs broke into a scream as the first man lunged over the ledge, blade flashing. Jonas swung, steel meeting flesh, the mountain erupting into chaos. And as the battle raged on that narrow ledge, Rachel realized the truth that had been building since the first knock on his cabin door. Jonas Hale had not just taken them in. He had given them his life. Steel clashed with bone. Jonas Hale drove his hatchet into the first man's shoulder with such force the scream echoed up the mountain and across the valley below. Blood sprayed the stone shelf. The man crumpled, but another was already scrambling up behind him, fury in his eyes, blade in hand. Jonas didn't hesitate. He turned with the fluidity of instinct and slammed the butt of the weapon into the second man's face, sending him tumbling back into the path of another climbing behind. The ledge became a bottleneck of bodies and rage. Rachel crouched behind a jagged outcrop of stone, clutching Anna and Thomas tightly, shielding them with her arms as if she could hide them from the carnage erupting only feet away. Her whole body trembled. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her hands gripped the rifle Jonas had given her, shaking but ready. She had never imagined a moment like this. Her children huddled on the edge of a cliff, a man she barely knew shedding blood to keep them alive, death clawing its way up the rock. And still, Jonas stood. The leader finally appeared, climbing with cold calculation while his men died before him. His coat flared behind him like the wings of a predator. His rifle was slung behind his back. He didn't need it. His eyes were fixed on Jonas with a hatred that burned. "You've caused me enough trouble, mountain man," he snarled. "You've cost me good men." Jonas turned to face him. Blood streaked his forehead, a deep gash above one brow, his breath heavy in the frigid air. "You chose to hunt a woman and 2 children through a mountain storm. That tells me what kind of men you lost." The leader's lips curled. "She's mine. I paid for her. She ran before I collected. I'll take her now, and if you're still breathing when I do, I'll carve out your eyes." Rachel gasped from behind the rock. She'd never heard him say that out loud, never thought he would, but hearing it from his mouth sent her stomach churning. She clutched her children tighter, her voice a whisper. "God help him." Jonas stepped forward between the man and the family behind him, raising the hatchet. His voice was quiet, but every word hit like thunder. "You'll take nothing but your last breath." And then the leader charged. They slammed into each other with the weight of bulls colliding. Jonas's hatchet clashed against the man's blade, sparks flying. They stumbled along the narrow shelf, boots sliding on loose snow, bodies grappling for dominance. Jonas landed a brutal elbow to the man's jaw, but the leader twisted, plunging his blade toward Jonas's ribs. Jonas turned at the last second, the knife sliced across his side instead of piercing deep. Blood soaked through his shirt instantly. He grunted, the pain sharp, but it didn't slow him. He drove forward, lifting the hatchet. The leader dodged, slamming his fist into Jonas's wounded side. Jonas staggered but didn't fall. He'd been through worse. He would not fall now. Rachel rose behind the rock, the rifle shaking in her hands. Thomas clung to her skirt, Anna silently sobbing against her leg. She could see Jonas bleeding, see the man who had taken everything from her pressing him against the cliff's edge. And then Jonas lost his footing. The leader's blade swept low, catching Jonas's knee. He buckled, one leg collapsing. The man stepped in with a cruel grin, blade raised for the final strike. Rachel screamed. Jonas heard it not with his ears but with his soul. That scream sliced through the fog of pain, the rage, the blood. He didn't think. He moved. He let himself fall backward, then rolled to the side just as the blade plunged down. The man overbalanced. Jonas came up with the hatchet, not high, but low, swinging upward into the man's side with a roar. The leader's scream tore across the mountainside as he stumbled back, clutching his ribs. Blood poured from the gash, staining the snow. He turned, trying to flee back down the ledge. But Jonas followed. With one final surge, Jonas slammed his shoulder into the man's back, sending them both crashing toward the edge. The man shrieked as his feet slid over the cliff. He grabbed for anything, snow, rock, Jonas's coat, but Jonas wrenched away. The leader fell. His scream echoed, long and horrible, until it ended in a brutal silence. Jonas stood there, panting, blood soaking his shirt and dripping into the snow. His knees wobbled, one hand pressed to his side. Rachel dropped the rifle and ran to him. "Jonas," she cried, her hands catching his chest before he could fall. "Jonas, you're bleeding, oh God." He looked down at her, his expression softening. "You okay?" She nodded through her sobs. "The children, they're safe, but you're—" "I'm still here," he rasped, pressing harder on his side. "Long enough." Rachel turned to Thomas. "Baby, help me, find cloth, anything." The boy ran to the bag she had carried, pulling out a shawl, then returned. Rachel pressed it against Jonas's wound, tying it tight. He hissed but didn't pull away. Rachel's tears dropped onto his chest. You should have run. You didn't have to stay and fight for us." He smiled faintly, blood on his lips. "You knocked on my door. You asked me to protect you. You could have said no." "I didn't want to." She leaned down and kissed his forehead, her lips shaking. "You're not dying. Not today. Not after all this." He chuckled weakly. "Bossy wife." She smiled through her tears. "You said it yourself, remember? You made me your wife. That means you're mine now. You don't get to leave." He nodded slowly, letting her help him sit down. The children rushed over, clinging to him, tears soaking his coat. He laid one hand on each of their heads, pulling them close. "I'm okay," he whispered to them. "You're okay now. We're gonna be okay." It took hours to climb back down the mountain. Jonas moved slowly, supported by Rachel and Thomas, his side bound with cloth, his steps deliberate. The other riders had fled when their leader fell, cowards who followed strength and scattered when it was lost. Rachel guided them to the remnants of the cabin. It had burned, yes, but the storm had doused most of the fire. One corner still stood, a piece of roof sagging low. Jonas sat down there, the children curled against him, Rachel resting at his side. The cabin could be rebuilt, the wounds could heal. And the family, because that's what they were now truly, had survived the mountain, the fire, the men, and the fear. Jonas looked at Rachel as the sun broke over the ridge, gold light pouring through the ruined walls. "You're not going anywhere, are you?" he asked, voice low. She leaned into him. "Not unless you carry me." He smirked, wincing. "Might have to wait a few days for that." She laughed through her tears. Anna stirred in her lap. Thomas looked up at Jonas with wide eyes. "Are you really our papa now?" Jonas didn't answer at first. He pulled them both close. "I am if you want me to be." Thomas nodded without hesitation. "I do." Anna whispered, "Me too." Rachel pressed her hand over Jonas's. "So do I." And for the first time in years, the mountain man who had lived alone in silence, who had once closed his door to the world, leaned his head back, closed his eyes, and felt like he belonged.